What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And today we are going to talk about actually probably a pretty cool journey. Our guest today is Rocio Luna from California, and I got connected to her through my friend Fabian Serrano, who is a member of the Killing Commercial community. And he said, David, if you want to talk about workers' comp with a dynamic producer, you need to reach out to her. She is doing great things out here. And you don't have to tell me twice. So immediately reached out, and here we are. So we're going to talk about her background in coming from claims and what she's doing as a producer and some of the things she has done to build her online brand, how she gets in front of clients, things like that. Um, and just see what's going on. So, Rocio, how are you today? What's going on?
Super excited to be on your podcast, David, and honored that my friend Fabian recommended me. He's awesome, great guy, a lot of amazing energy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we get kicked off, why don't you take just a couple of seconds and let's talk a little bit about how you got into the insurance industry and maybe even just bring us to your journey to where you got how you got to where you're at today.
Yes. So I got into the insurance space at a really young age, right after college. I was 22 years old, and I was going to Cal State Fullerton for a major under psychology. I wanted to work under social services, but I realized after taking my last class that I wasn't mentally mature or prepared for that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to
But
uh,
you were mentally mature enough to recognize that you were not mentally mature enough to do that. That's the irony in what you just said. At least you were that mentally mature because that puts you light years ahead of me.
and that's it's true, but because at that moment, I was like, I'm gonna take all of this home. And I just, I couldn't do it at that stage of my life. So I was like, you know what? I never had a real job from 8 to 5. I used to work at LA Fitness as the operations manager, well, operations front desk, and I had a part time from 4 a.m. till 11 a.m. That's why I also get up so early. Um, so right after college, I decided to apply at all entry level positions. I applied in sales. There was a claims position. There was I think Costco. I applied for Costco too. I literally applied everywhere because I was like, I need to get a job. So I got called into a small brokerage out in Huntington Beach, and they were looking for a claims assistant. I had no idea what claims meant, let alone insurance. So the requirements were no experience needed. We'll train you. We will educate you, train you, and all we need is just someone that's willing to learn. So I went to the interview, and they were desperate because they were like, okay, if we give you a job, because they're like, we haven't been able to find anyone bilingual in the last month and we're really falling behind. So if we give you an offer, can you start Monday? And this was on a Friday. So I was like, absolutely. Like, I need a job. Like, I will do it. All they ask is that just give me 90 days of yourself. Try it out. If you don't like it, then that's fine. You could quit, but just give us a solid 90 days. That's all we're asking for. And I said, sure. So as you can imagine, I took this position, and it was literally like it was, drinking out of a fire hose because I didn't know anything about insurance, anything about claims. And they were really backed up in work. So I was just given a desk full of so many things, like a lot of this organization. And the first 2 weeks, they were like, do whatever you can to make it possible to organize it. Like, he's like, if you could just, put the companies and separate the files, that's going to be huge for us. And I was like, okay. And then that's literally how I started.
So let me ask you this because I think it's interesting that your original career path based on what your college education was in may actually have set you up to have some of the I'm going to say mental maturity. I don't know that it's the right word, even though that's the one that you used. But I have to believe that if you're conditioned to go into working with social services, or I mean, my wife is kind of in that space,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a certain level of patience, empathy, compassion for people in order to do very, very well in that. I suspect that subconsciously that also prepared you to deal with people who are dealing with something they don't want to be dealing with, which is claims. I know that I don't remember the actual percentage Kevin Ring puts on it from the Institute of Work Comp Professionals, but I want to say it's over 80% of the people who get injured at work on a workers' compensation claim. That's the first time they've ever had one. And they don't
Mm-hmm.
know what's going to happen. There's uncertainty, there's fear, and there's everything else. And I don't want to dive too deep into that, but as you're telling your story, I'm thinking to myself, like, maybe some of those psychology classes and some of the other things that she took as part of her college education was actually setting her up to be successful in that role, even though it's not a direct correlation.
Yes, and I totally agree with you. So there was always I always wanted the need to help, and I understand, when people feel struggles. I'm like, my perception is always like, I want to get someone out of a shitty situation. So like, if whatever I could do to pull you out, to help you out, to recuperate, start over again. That's kind of always been my mentality. So I do agree with you in that sense. And since I was, brand new, didn't know anything, I felt lost myself. I was like, oh my, how am I going to help this person who needs help? And I'm like, I don't even know like what I'm doing, but as long as I like could understand them and communicate, I think that was a really big help for me, because I was like, okay, I don't have the answer, but I'm going to find out. Give me 2 hours, or give me until the end of the day. And somehow I learned how to be really resourceful. So I'm actually very happy for all the nice adjusters that I encountered in my beginning. Because there were some, if you ever dealt in the claims in the adjuster world, I totally understand, because poor adjusters, it takes a person with a really big heart, a lot of patience, because adjusters are overworked. They have so many files on them. Unfortunately, everybody screams at the adjuster. You get the employer, the employee, the attorney, the clinics. Everybody hates you. Um,
And the carrier and
mhm.
their employer in some cases too. And I'll tell you, so one of the things I think that every producer has to become accustomed to, if you're going to be involved with claims with your clients, which we can debate how much a producer really should be involved in any of that stuff without it being what they do 100% of the time. But I will never forget the first time I started a conversation with an adjuster relatively shortly after I started in the industry. And I thought to myself, how incredibly rude this person is. They're talking to me in such short sentences and direct
Mhm.
bullet points. And it's like literally after, 20 years later, I'm sitting back and realize, adjusters have their own language. They have to
Mhm.
notate files. That's just how they talk. It's not that they're being rude or disrespectful or anything else, but it's almost like everything's a telegram. So
Mhm.
an email doesn't really look any different than the adjuster's notes when I go in and I look at a developing claim inside of one of the carrier's websites. So I think that's funny that you say that they're getting yelled at by everybody. I think that there's probably a misconception by a lot of people too who freely reach out to adjusters and things. You have to understand the language and how they communicate. Not that it's overly complicated to do, it's just different than what you and I would talk about if we, or how we would communicate if we're going back and forth.
Yes. And just because I've been in the claim side, right? So I even picked up some of that rhythm. And sometimes some of my emails could be really dry too. It's just like, it's due, blah, 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 date, you and me. I could talk that lingo as well. And it's the same thing, because in claims, it's factual, right? It's all facts. It's all facts based. What is it? When is the next time to follow up? It's all like, it's a timeline. So there's
Yep.
not much of like a story besides that, or we have to wait.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm a big fan of it because I'm actually a really direct person in most interactions in my life. So I actually appreciate that it's much quicker to get through than having to sit and read a long, drawn out story with a bunch of crap in there that really isn't relevant anyhow. You know,
Yeah.
you have producers who want to shoot the line of BS and have the story for everything, and you have an adjuster that just simply wants to get to the next file on their desk after they get through their facts. It's humorous. I would love to have a hidden camera just watching the first time a producer reads an adjuster's email. So you were in claims. Were you at that point focused on workers' comp, or were you just kind of a generalist when it comes to claims for the firm you were in?
Yes. So the first 4 years, it was definitely just workers' comp. So the brokerage that I used to work for, they were really highly focused on, um, well, they were new too. They were beginning to grow their book of business, but they started going after um, companies that had high X mods. So the whole service was that you would bring you on, and your claims person would assist you, And along with that, we have, different vendors such as OSHA, which is, it was God Safety. Now it's, no, it was EAP. Now it's God Safety. They're a pretty well known OSHA person. But so it was selling that, selling Zywave, and then also selling the human resources slash legal assistance hotline. So it was all bundled and packaged together. So a lot of my first 4 years dealt with workers' comp claims and wrongful termination. So, when people have the cumulative trauma claims, they get terminated. Often the wrongful termination claims are also, they commingle. It's not as well as discrimination, right? Because someone gets a workers' comp claim and either they quit or there's friction between management and then they get fired, or the insured doesn't know like how to properly terminate someone. Now it puts them into that whole arena, and especially here in California, man. It's in California.
Well, yeah, I was going to say it'd be very interesting. Like we could probably go for hours just on the differences in the system from the legal aspect of it, Florida compared to California, because here, I don't know that I've ever had a case where we had a comp claim that turned into wrongful termination or discrimination. I'm not saying they don't happen. I'm just telling you in 20 years, I can't remember a single time in my book of business. And the reason why is because when we have the claims that are at a point, and let's face it, there's a lot that goes into getting to that stage of the game too. You've got an employer who probably thinks the employee's trying to screw them over or lying. A lot of times the employer is also thinking that the carrier is just trying to make this go away, and they're not happy that they're paying it because they think the employee is filing a fraudulent claim or whatever. And so there's a lot of emotional
Mm-hmm.
dynamics that go into it that really don't have a place in it. From my perspective, comp statutory, here's the law. It's either this way or it's this way. But down here, when you get to the point where you're getting ready to settle a case, almost every single time that it would be someone that the employer would want to get rid of. They just do. Like it's part of the settling of the workers' comp case where there's a legal document that's drafted and money is changed hands in consideration. And I mean, it's as little as $100, but it's an unconditional release where the employee says, I understand my claims being settled, and as a result of this consideration of $100, I'm resigning my position at such and such employer, and it doesn't blow back on them. So it's kind of crazy to see that. I don't know if you're able to do that in California or not, but
Yeah, you
uh,
are, but definitely after $100. I'm like, whoa, $100.
yeah, it's a crazy low amount. Now, the
Wow.
settlement, by the time you're looking at the settlement, it's like the settlement's usually a relatively large number, so it's not, the actual cash consideration for the resignation is probably valued at tens of thousands, if not more, dollars. It's just some level of consideration, and I want to say it's $100 is the minimum, and so that's why
Mm,
it's that number. But and that's only even really happened a few times. Part of it's because I feel like, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but if you're working with your client the right way and they have the right processes and procedures in place, including how they hire, onboard, and train their
mm-hmm,
people, you're going to weed out a good bit of that before you ever get to that point. And if you don't weed it out before you get to that point, you should be able to see your loss runs tell you a story over that person's time working with you. That's why, when I go out and do a mod review, I literally take 3 pages. Now, I mean, there's a number of different mod tools out there now, but I mean, they all pretty much have it. Look, the mod formula is the mod formula. It's math.
mm-hmm.
It's how they package it, put the pictures in, what reports they have. And I mean, most of those reports can be 30 or 40 pages long if you include
Yeah.
everything in them. I like 2 or 3 pages is all I need. And for me, one of them is the easiest one to talk about, and I'm sure you know this obviously, is the controllable mod. Like the average person has no idea that what the minimum mod is, what the controllable mod means, how many dollars they're leaving on the table, and you can usually get them riled up pretty good if you
Mm-hmm.
just focus on that. Because if you can show somebody, and I want to be clear for people who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, you've probably heard me use this example a million times, but I mean, this isn't relegated to just people who have high experience mods and mod problems. You could have what appears to be a good mod that's not a great mod, but you're still leaving a lot of money on the table every single year. And the example that I use is one from a number of years ago now, where it was a $500,000 in comp premium and the mod was a 0.86, and they couldn't, they had no idea they could have been better than that. And so is the producer, I just said, look, how good could you be? And the guy looked at me like I had an eyeball in the middle of my forehead. And I'm like, well, I mean, did you get to 0.86 and stop because you thought that's where that was the best you could be? Has anybody ever come in and showed you you might actually be able to be better? And the way the numbers shook out, his minimum mod was actually a 0.64. So like nobody had ever given them an action plan to go from, you know, what by all accounts is good to great. But 22 points on $500,000 is $100,000 a year they're leaving on the table that they never even attempted to try and claw back and get, because they just thought, oh, well, 0.86 is better than one.
And
You know,
you bring up a really good point, David. I think us as an industry, we focus a lot of the over 1.0, right? We're always like, oh, even I make my whole
that's low hanging fruit.
social.
That's the easy
Yes.
stuff, right?
Yes. But we forget about, so like you like you said, there's the basic stuff that you need, right? Like your safety procedures. You start implementing your onboarding, your hiring process, but then you want to take back to really like, what are your physical abilities? Like, what is it that you do? Like, you really hone in and you start going. It's a whole ladder, and it's that's the beauty of me when I look back how I started. So I started, didn't know anything. The old brokerage that I was at, they didn't have anything structured. So that's when I learned. I was like, okay, there needs to be policies and procedures in place. So like if I'm going to have to train someone, which I eventually did, and have people under me, they need to be able to see what's going on, understand, and easily be able to repeat. But it all comes down to like, okay, what is it that you really need? Is it, first of all, you want to control where are you bleeding? Are we, or we gotta control that. And then little by little start attacking everything else. And again, I think a lot of times employers are receptive to change because they're scared, or they've been screwed over. Maybe they were sold a dream and they're like, I didn't get anything. I don't want to do this again. And also maybe they're scared because sometimes they're like, dude, I'm such a mess. Like I'm a mess.
They don't even know where to start
Yeah,
a lot of the
exactly.
times. And I mean, look, this is going to go back to something I say all the time, but it's the difference between solving problems and selling policies. You know, if you're an insurance agent and all you do is sell insurance, I'm not going to tell you that there's anything wrong with that. There's a lot of people who only want to sell insurance and handle that transaction and be done with it. Do I think that's the best representation for a client or a prospect? Absolutely not, because you're not doing anything to fix what's causing the insurance problem. You have to actually go and figure out, okay, to your point, where are we bleeding? And then how do we get this? And the other thing is, as a producer, you need to be thinking to yourself and just being honest, is this person willing to do what's necessary to change these things? Because there are people out there that just simply aren't going to invest in the infrastructure and the change because they don't get it. And you're wasting your time if you're a consultative problem solver who's going to go in and put systems in place, and these people are going to push back. You're wasting your time. You're never going to get anywhere. You might as well just be that transactional agent. So how you prospect and how you identify whether or not it makes sense for you to go to the next step in the process is also a huge part of all of this stuff. And you're right. A lot of people feel like the employers feel like they've been screwed over or whatever, which is why my other report that I didn't get to is so important, because psychologically for me at the point of sale, if I really want to get an employer foaming at the mouth, outside of the controllable mod, it's the injuries and mod points and dollars by employee report. Because if I can go back and see that John Smith, by the way, there is no John Smith as far as I'm aware of. This is fictitious. I want to put that disclaimer on this. But if John Smith has 3 claims in 4 years and he's still employed it's reasonable for me to assume that John Smith is likely going to have another workers' comp claim at some point in this current policy period based on the frequency that he's shown, especially if it's progressive in nature. And so then you can have conversations with the business owner about that. Hey, I just want to let you know John Smith's trending like he's about ready to have another comp claim, and these have all been kind of minor deals. This one could be the big one. We probably need to figure out if John Smith is really in the right place. Should he be
Hmm.
here? Because it seems like he's very danger prone. And sometimes they listen to you, sometimes they don't. And you probably the best story that I have around that is a plumbing company that I worked with here where they had a quote unquote John Smith who worked there in exact same scenario. It was a little ticky tack claim here. Here's another one. Here's another one. And I said, this guy's got to go. Like I wasn't even nice about it. I said, this person has got to go. They are going to cost you a lot of money. Talk to me about it. Oh, no. This guy's a great plumber. We can't hire help right now. We can't find good plumbers. And he's really, I'm like, this guy is going to cost you a lot of money. You really need to figure out if he's really the best person for this job. I understand everything that you're saying. I highly recommend we figure out a way, to invite John to leave, whether it be attendance or whatever else. There has to be some things that we can find in his behaviors every day. Not that we're necessarily doing a witch hunt, but this guy made it pretty easy. There was a lot of things going on in this particular team member's file. He shouldn't have been there, but it's the old excuse of, well, we can't hire good help. Well, that doesn't mean you hire bad help. I'd rather hire no help than hire bad help. So anyhow, they didn't listen to me. They didn't get rid of this guy. Not less than 3 weeks after that conversation, the guy was carrying PVC, an armload of PVC through somebody's front yard, steps in a hole, twists his knee, and he's out 16 weeks.
Oh.
Okay. So number one, couldn't get him back to work because he had to have some surgery. So it was already indemnity claim. Here comes the mod, right? And so fast forward, when this claim finally hits the mod, I'm a smart aleck to some degree, and I had the ability to do this with this client because we had a long-standing relationship and we became very good personal friends too. But I called him. I'm like, hey man, we need to go out to lunch. He said, why? I said, I want to celebrate your $100,000 plumber. He's like, what are you talking about, man? I said, you've got the only $100,000 plumber I know in Tampa. He's like, I don't have anybody I pay $100,000. I said, oh, I didn't say you paid him. I said they cost you. See, because you're paying him $60,000 a year, but because you didn't get rid of this guy when I told you he was going to cause a problem for you, your experience mod on $200,000 in premium just went up 20 points, and now there's $40,000 of excess premium you're going to have to pay as a result of this. So he's $100,000 at a bare minimum. And like, he just wanted to throw up because there was nothing to say at that point. But the reason I tell stories like that on the podcast is because I want you as agents to understand this should not have been a surprise. Like we saw the predictive factors that this guy was probably going to have another claim and have a big one, number one. But if all you're doing is getting loss runs because your underwriter says you have to have them so that you can get a quote, and you're not actually reading them and looking at the story that they tell, then you're missing out because there are so many things that can be gleaned from just looking at loss runs and reading them, more than you're going to get off of reading the workers' comp policy. It's only 6 pages long, and there's only so much they're going to be able to tell you on a deck page. But if I can go in and see that you've got an issue with lag time, or you have claims that should have been subrogated that weren't, why? Or you have low dollar indemnity claims on your experience mod, tells me you don't have a return to work program in place because there's no reason somebody should be out of work for 3 or 4 days worth of pay or a week or whatever when you can get them back. And I mean, all of that can be looked at on the loss runs, and a conversation had around all of those things. If you have lag time, it tells me you don't have a pre-injury management program. If you did, then that wouldn't happen, right? So I don't know. I'm telling you things you already know, I'm sure, but for the people listening to this, take it seriously. If you're looking for a New Year's resolution in 2025, tell yourself, I'm going to read the loss runs on every prospect that gives them to me. I'm actually going to sit down and read them and see what they say to me. So talk a little bit about you migrated because I mean we've gotten to your first 4 years you were in workers comp, and then I feel like we've just gone on a tirade about workers comp the rest of the time. So I mean, let's get through to where you're at now. How, like that transition.
Yeah. So I 4 years to develop my career, and then I got a little dabbled into more into like auto claims, general liability, a little bit property. Got some certifications under workers comp. And I was 28, and my next stop was I was going to be a manager for State Fund, which is a workers comp carrier out here, a manager managing adjusters, a group of 10 people, or I could do sales. And again, 28, I was like, oh my God, I'm definitely like, I've only managed two people under my roof. There's no way I'm going to manage 10
Yeah,
people,
pick your
especially,
poison. Which one's worse?
yeah, especially, these people are all older than me. And I'm like, no, I'm going to, no. So I was like, okay, well, I guess it sells. And I did it because also I really enjoyed working with the insureds, right? Like really diving in, like you said, talk about the loss runs. Now talking about the losses, but honestly, like when people can have losses, you don't understand. People don't understand. Sometimes they don't understand how much that hurts an employer premium wise. These people are bleeding 50K just on workers comp or more. That's just workers comp. These guys have GL, auto, property, other claims going on, and now that's tapping into their payroll. Now that's tapping into their family. Now that's tapping in, and when you get to sit down with an insured across and they tell you intimate things, personal things that's going on in their life and their family at their business, that's when I'm just like, wow, like, I feel honored. Like, thank you for sharing that with me and trusting me with that. And then realizing like why they don't give up, that entrepreneur and that's when I was like connecting. I'm like, I really want to help out people protect their businesses. So I took the leap of faith in sales. And my first year, I did a lot of cold calling. I sucked. I was horrible. I had no idea because I went from being behind the desk all the time, answering phone calls. I had really great customer service. But that was not, I wasn't able to translate that my first probably 7, 6 months because I got anxiety. I got anxiety from people hanging up on me, people telling you off, people not saying, not knowing what to say. But then I got over the hurdle and I was like, oh well, I really used claims, and that honestly the claims part just helped me out so much.
Yeah, so what do you think your biggest challenge was transitioning? Was it the cold calling, or was there something else that sort of caught you by surprise that made it a challenge for you to move over from the claims side to production?
So I think the challenge was me hunting. So that whole hunting is, I never did any hunting, right? Like looking for
Oh, you
prospects
don't
because
have to worry about it. They're going to call you when you're in claims. You can be sure of that.
yeah, for sure. Yes. And it's because, you're always there, right? It's like, yeah, it's like they need you. They're like, and the attitude's different, right? Because someone who needs you is like, oh, please help me, like, okay, thank you so much. And then someone who does not want to answer your call, it's a complete stranger. They're just like, who the fuck are you? Like, I don't
Mm.
care. So that whole, definitely the mindset of going after and hunting and getting over the imposter syndrome too, because the producers that were around me were all 45 white males, really dominant, like, oh, I'm a construction guy, like, your typical golfer
It's
type of
funny. You're
guy.
like literally walking right down the line of questioning I was going to ask, because my next question honestly was going to be, and I'm only telling you this now so you can answer it in the fabric that you're weaving as you answer this question. But I'm interested in what your perception of being a producer was like, and what some of the, I don't know that I would say necessarily obstacles, but what were some of the challenges that you faced specifically because you're female in that role? Because you're already telling me imposter syndrome and everything else. And I don't think that necessarily isolates itself to gender. I can't think from a woman's perspective. I can try and put myself in your shoes and think that it's probably worse, if you're female in a male dominated industry. But take that part of the equation out just for a second. Any of us that were never a producer before, I think about the first time I went in to get like maybe my first module of my CIC, And like my whole goal was to turn into one of the guys that was on the back two rows reading the newspaper the entire time because they were just there to get their continuing ed. Like that's who the old guard was, right? It was the old producer that's already made it, thinks they're better than everybody else. They don't even pay attention. And it's like these are the guys I'm competing with. I don't belong in this room. These guys have already proven themselves. They can just sit in the back and do nothing. And at some point that changed into those bastards are who I'm competing with on the street. If they take their job as seriously as they take their continuing ed, I don't want to be anything like them. I'm going to go take their business from them.
Yeah.
But talk about that for a second. You know, it's part of what you're saying. You know, you go in, it's imposter syndrome. You're in there with these guys that are in their mid 40s, 50s. They've been producers for a while. Here you are, 28 years old, female. You know, you're California and Florida are two, you know, very multicultural areas. You know, there may be issues, you know, around your heritage that could have come up. If you're Hispanic heritage that may have come into play. I don't really see that as much here just because we're so blended where I live that it's like second nature. So I don't see the same kind of discrimination there. In fact, if anything, I would argue maybe that it's reverse in that it would be much tougher for me as a Caucasian to go get into a Hispanic owned business than it would be for a Hispanic person to go get into a Caucasian owned business because I feel like there's a bond there. Now, I'm not going to tell you that bond can't be broken. It's just it's more difficult. And specifically here, it's different because unlike Miami, where you literally have almost one of every nation down there that live in neighborhoods by pockets, or even like New York City or something like that, it's not the same way. We have the Cuban settlements that where people came in for the cigar industry over in West Tampa and all of that. But by and large, the majority of the agricultural workers and construction and all of that is pretty much relegated to Mexicans for the most part. And what I found out about those guys is they'll eat their own young. Like they're worse to each other than
Oh yeah.
they're worse to each other than any, you know, deep South bigot agent would ever be to them. And it blows my mind, but they take it. I can't believe, but it's interesting. So the reason I study and pay attention to this stuff is because in my graduate school, I actually did an independent study on the Hispanic underground economy in the Birmingham, Alabama metropolitan area. I lived in Shelby County for a while. And if you were black or white at that time, you were a minority. We were overrun at that point by people coming in that were Hispanic because it was very much a service-based economy and they were doing the jobs nobody else wanted to do. And I owned a landscape company at the time while I was going through in school at night. And I got to know these guys and they trusted me. And I mean, if you've ever read the book Freakonomics, there's a vignette in Freakonomics about why do if drug dealers are so successful, why do they still live with their mother or something along those lines, right? And the whole thing was about how you start out as a street pusher and you're not really making any money until you get to the top of the food chain. The way these guys operated was very organized and it wasn't much different than that. You know, if you spoke English, you always made the most money. If you had a car and you could take the other people to work, you would charge them both ways. And I got in, I found out where they were getting their IDs made, like how, like all of the things. I felt like an investigative journalist. It was actually a really, really cool process for me to go through. But when I got down here, what I found out was it's the same thing, but it's almost like it's a mafia type deal, to be honest with you. You know, there was a dedicated attorney, a dedicated accountant, so that when you came over, if you were going to open a business or whatever, you went to this person first, then you went to this person for your insurance, and all of them are swapping money back and forth for referrals and everything else. But when I knew it was bad is when I had a guy that I went in to meet with that a banker that's a referral partner of mine referred me in to look at the workers' comp, and this guy was a rebar person. Like all he really did was go in and they would lay and tie the rebar in the foundations for like prisons and schools, and this it was not high hazard work at all. It was all ground level, and he was getting his labor from a temp staffing firm that was inside of a PEO on their master workers comp policy, and he's like paying triple what he should pay. And I just looked at him and I'm like, man, I'm sorry. Like, I don't understand why you're in this situation. This isn't a big deal. And I said, I'm 100% confident we can take care of this and save you a lot of money off of where you're at. And I never say save money because that's not my angle for going in. But in this situation, it was just so egregious what what they were doing to this guy. And we did. We went in, we placed his comp policy with the normal carrier. We cut his premium by 66%, and he was off to the races. But I asked him, I said, how did you get in the situation you were in? He goes, well, you know, when I migrated over here, I came to Plant City. This is the attorney they told me to go to. He set up my business. This is the accountant. He's the one who takes care of my books. And they referred me to the insurance person. And I said,
Ugh.
everybody you know that's coming here, tell them don't talk to that person. You have them come talk to me now. But it was interesting because it was like they're so punitive to each other that there's actually a great opportunity. But even though that's happening, it's still very difficult to crack the surface to get in to talk to these people.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just saying that that Mexicans are kind of like crabs in the sense that, you know, have you seen crabs trying to crawl up the bucket and but they bring each other down. That's why they never really make it. But and no, in that sense, I do think I think there is definitely a big misconception on that in my culture, because I am Mexican, in the sense that we we don't help each other out in the ways we should, and we are, you know, we are pretty mean towards each other. And even like with the Mexicans, we have like, you know, because Mexico's diverse too. We have Spanish people, we have some of the
Sure.
people that migrate to the coast, and our shades and colors are all different. You know, you have some really short dark Mexican, you have some really tall white, like you thought you would think those people are white, but they're just light skinned Mexicans. So we like range.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I graduated my undergrads from a liberal arts college, and you take a lot of classes you think probably are a waste of time while you're there. But as I look back now, it gives me a completely different perspective on everything. And I mean, look, I am white privilege. I get that. Okay. I can't control who I was born to, how I was born, what my race is, where I live, or any of that. I completely understand that I am the demographic of quote unquote the man. I fit that mold, period. And I do everything I can to try not to be like, I don't live my life that way, don't get me wrong, but if you're just looking at me, I'm exactly the problem in the insurance industry and otherwise, as far as, you know, special treatment or whatever else. But going through that process at Birmingham Southern was actually really, really interesting, because one of the things that I never would have thought of was the discrimination within a race,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it wasn't necessarily the Hispanics as much as it was the different shades of black people from the islands or whatever. And I'm trying to remember the name of the book. We read a book that was a true story, but then there was also somebody that was in the class that had come from Jamaica that lived there. And the whole thing was that the darker your skin is, the more you were discriminated against. So even if you had, you know, five people that would be considered black by our standards, the lightest skinned always seemed to be the ones that had more money, the better jobs, everything else. And the people who were the darkest were the ones that were discriminated against the most. And you just like, that's not even something I ever even would have thought of unless I sat in a class and somebody said, no, this is a real issue and this happens. And then to hear you say that again, that, you know, even inside of the Mexican culture,
Mm-hmm.
there's different, you know, and I think that goes, it's probably no different than what it was like in the United States. And I know we're getting way off topic here, but I mean, even with Indian tribes and things like that, you're Indians, but even they would fight against each other. And you would think counterintuitively that if everybody's Indian, they should all get along. But we need to go back and realize that these people were fighting over the same land that we were fighting with them for. And they weren't necessarily, just because they're Indian doesn't mean we're friendly with each other, you know, any more than it means that you could be white today and still have issues with other white people. It just, I don't know. It's fascinating to me because I think that we have so many of the problems we have seem so easy to fix. You just have to be willing to fix them. But then you get into like all these different complexities and you can go down rabbit holes for days.
Yeah.
But all of this started with you're coming into the industry. Like, how were you received as a 28-year-old Hispanic female producer that was competing against 40 to 50-year-old white males that had been in the industry as producers for 20 years or more?
I mean, I was not mistreated. I can definitely not that. I think they were just like, all right, like knock yourself out, you know, because I didn't um it takes a lot of movement to make it. And for me, it was more like just intimidating, right? Because these guys already have a book of business, they have some type of swag, they already have like their persona. And it's like, man, like I'm not this big tough guy that I could just come in like, oh, I'm gonna save you, you know, I'm gonna pound the table and and fight for
But you know
you.
what? That perception is no different than what my perception was coming in. As a 6'4" white male, those same guys would have intimidated me. So I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that. I'm glad to hear that you weren't mistreated because I have plenty of friends that would tell me otherwise based on their experience. But your perception, the first time, we'll call it the first time you walked into the room or whatever, is literally the exact same thing as mine was.
Yeah, and then
Seriously.
it is intimidating, right? Because these people have, you know, $1 million book of business or larger, and you're like, wow, like I got to start from the bottom because there's no way I'm going to be able to grab $1 million account, or you know, I have to know how to navigate, how to talk. I don't even know how the business operates, right? Like I don't know what financials are. I don't know the structures of it or what the structures of the business. Um, so it was intimidating, but I do like the fact that I use my woman card. So I think women, we have a sixth sense and we're really good at with connecting with people. So connecting with people, understanding. And also one thing that helped me out is that yes, I connected with the business owner, but I also connected with their management team, with their human resources, with the person. Typically, those people who are managers and human resources are women. So that kind of helped me anchor that relationship and say, oh yeah, Rocio's great. Like she's always responding back to us and they advocate for me to the males. And they're like, okay, cool. She's awesome. She likes you. And I'm happy because as long as Susie's happy, I'm happy.
Yeah, there's a Susie in every business too.
Yes.
Trust me on that. So, what led you into workers' comp specifically now as a producer? Was it the claims history? Was it the opportunity? Was it the fact that you could use actual case studies and dollars to make deals happen? I mean, what was attractive to you about leading with workers' comp?
It's the fact that I had created my own risk management plan. So prior, I was the one who created it. I was the one who formed it. I was the one, you know, who did all the templates and the forms. So it's something that I already knew and had experience in and talking about it, like working with the claims and also the relationships that I already had created with the carriers and the adjusters, right? So it's very different versus someone who's like calls a random adjuster versus like me who I already know this person. This adjuster's been with ICW for the past 6 years. We have accounts, you know, like that relationship.
Hmm.
So I was like, oh, it was definitely um I was comfortable in it. So that's I was like, okay, I could lead to it. I could talk about it. I already know the main carriers here. And then that's what led me to venture into construction and staffing. And then also, you know, because they're kind of similar too. They have
Hmm.
a, you know, they're seasonal, they have a lot of high turnover. They have a lot of workers' comp claims and they both bid. So they both bid and they use the workers' comp rates to win proposals. And just like subcontractors, the temp agencies are also the subcontractors for the client.
Yeah, I think, wow, in temp staffing is certainly one that I think a lot of people want to try and do because they see what the premiums look like in some of
Mm-hmm.
those. But to go in and work temp staffing accounts the right way is just, you have to know your stuff, and you have to have infrastructure. You have to have systems in place. One of the things that I always have felt though is if you do have a claims background, you really are the best advocate for both the carrier and the client, in my opinion. Obviously, the injured worker, but what I mean when I say that is there's so many times, and we've already talked about it, a couple times, where you'll go in and you're in the middle of this claim, and the client does not want the carrier to pay anything. In fact, we all have clients who think every time somebody gets injured that you need to get the special investigation unit out right away because this is
Yes.
fraud. They're here to screw me. But I mean, you're going to get into those times where a carrier wants to settle, and you can see that, right? As the claims professional, and even though I'm not at this point, I've been through this enough times, I understand we need to settle this here because if we don't, the outcome could be much, much worse if we let this thing go to court. Then you have the client who says, I don't want this person to settle because then they win. And if they win, everybody
Mhm.
else is to think that they can come in and do this. Knowing that experience really makes you a great advocate to go to that client and say, listen, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I've sat on the claim side of the table for a long time. And here's what I'm going to tell you. And here's what I'm going to tell you's happened in my experience if we don't settle this claim right now. This is what your worst case scenario could be. And I think it's a really interesting position to be in. At the same time, you know, if you don't think that the carrier's doing it the right way or that the client does have some valid concerns, then you can go back and you speak their language a little bit and can probably get through to them better than what I would be able to just as somebody who's, a producer that's working on, a claim file for one of my clients that really doesn't have specific claims experience in my background. And I've always felt that that would be really empowering to be in that position because if you can keep that client talked off the ledge and make the impact based on because look, some of the times the experience mod that may be their fault. Most of the time it is anyhow because they don't have processes and procedures in place. But if they're the type that wants to fight every claim and somebody gives into them and they fight it, that could be pushing the mod up too because the claims end up settling for more money if it goes to comp court.
Mm-hmm. And the scenario you just painted, that's exactly what I use. So I always paint the picture of like, this is what it's going to look like right now. If you settle, it's going to be, I don't know, $5,000 settled right now, versus 2 years from now. But now look at this, this claim is going to be open on your XMOD for the next 2 years at these reserves. I always circle back reserves. This is what increases your premium versus if it closes here at 10 or 5. Which one do you want? Do you want this right here, or do you want to pay for an extra 2 years just to know that this claim is going to get settled and he's going to get a paycheck? Because that's what happens. It doesn't go on and they close it. He doesn't get paid out. He's going to get paid out either through compromise or release or stipulation.
Yeah, and the way I frame it is I'll ask my client, do you want to make an emotional decision here or do we want to make a business decision? Because they're two very different things. If you want to fight so that you can get the satisfaction of feeling like you won, that's fine. But if you want to protect your financial statements, probably need to look at what the numbers tell us to do. And you know what? There's a certain amount of power in knowing that you did the right thing for your business and you're protecting all of the other team members that you have, as opposed to just winning over this one person that you think is just out to get you for whatever reason. So yeah, I think that's really good. So talk a little bit about what you're like. Again, we could probably talk for hours on end. But I know you're active on LinkedIn. I know you're doing a lot of stuff where you're doing like client facing webinars and things to educate people. How did you approach starting to build your personal brand, both online and otherwise? And what kind of tipped you off to say, okay, I really need to do some of these things to differentiate myself from my competition and get out there more?
Yes. So when I was 28 years old, actually, I got this. Someone asked me this. What would you have done, if you were to go back 3 years? 'Cause I've been in sales for 3 years now. What would you have done different? And I said I would have started my social media. I would have started my social media at age 28, because I wanted to do that, but the agency told me no, like that doesn't work. That's dumb. That's what young kids do. That's what an 18-year-olds do. You're not an 18-year-old. You're 28 years old. So you need to get out there, do it like the old school way, which is pick up the phone. And that's how everybody has built a book of business. And that's how it was. They're like, no one taught us. It's you either make it or don't make it. That's how it was given to me. And I was like, okay. But as
That's
soon
hard to
as
believe that that was only 3 years ago, though, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, we're in an age where digital and social's been around for a long time. I mean, I've been on LinkedIn since like 2004 at this point.
That's amazing. And
I'm not gonna say I did it right the whole time, but I've been more active the last 3 or 4 years. But I mean, that just blows my mind that as recently as 3 years ago, because I believe people, if you hear anything that we talk about today that's going to help you, if you don't want anything to do with workers' comp, Rocio and I are perfectly fine with that. That leaves more for the two of us to go after. But you have to understand that if you're going to build your brand online, building your brand on social media works just like compound interest does by putting money in your bank account.
mhm.
If I'm going to go put money into an investment, even if it's a 10% return, 20% return, it's not going to seem like a lot in year number one. And it might not seem like that much more in year number two. But if you consistently make those deposits, they're going to pay back. And, you're 100% right. You should have started 3 years ago. It's crazy that you weren't encouraged to do that. I think that also goes back to a lot of the issues that our industry faces, though, of male, pale, stale. I want to control. I don't want to collaborate. I
Mhm.
want you to build my brand, not your brand. And there's a lot of insecurities, I think, that lead agency principals to make decisions like that. My advice would be embrace it. If you have people that are in your organization that are entrepreneurial and they want to go out and do these things that are ultimately going to benefit you, even though it may not seem like it on the surface, you would be far better off letting them go and explore and do these things, because if they're entrepreneurial enough, they're only going to put up with your garbage for so long, and then they're just going to go open their own agency and do it for themselves.
You are 100% right about that. Yeah, that's what ends up happening. So I think it's the same thing that our industry, well, as a whole, I think um we take a while, we take time to adapt to technology, right? I mean, I think some agencies are barely getting used to some of like the faster accords, but I know other agencies who are still using like paper, and I'm just like, what? Like it's 2024. You guys are still like emailing, not,
Listen,
scanning documents.
I'm going to tell you probably one of the most mind-blowing things that I've had happen over the last 5 years is when we were on the cover of Rough Notes. We got to go up to the Rough Notes corporate office or whatever, and it's actually really kind of cool. I don't even really feel like you need to be an insurance nerd to appreciate the history that they have there, because it's kind of, have you ever been?
Uh-uh.
It's kind of like a museum, but they actually have what is called the Rough Notes desk, and it's the very first agency management system that agencies used, and it's this big wooden desk that has all kinds of slots and drawers, and every one of them is its own unique size, and only the form that goes in that slot will fit in that slot.
Oh, wow.
But that's how people did applications and forms and endorsements and all of this. It was just on this huge desk. And you're sitting here thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, how in the world could anybody run an agency using this? And then the other shoe drops and they say, and guess what? There are still over 500 agencies that use this desk
Oh my God.
today. And we know this because they only can get the forms by reordering them from us, and they continue to reorder.
Oh
So
my God.
you want to talk about not adapting to technology. It blows my mind, because I feel like we are so primed. We're so primed for just advancement at a rapid pace. And there's so many different things out there. But on the other side, there's so many different things out there, and then agents aren't always the most discerning, and then they try one of everything. It doesn't work because they didn't use it right. Now they don't want tech at all. But yeah, it's crazy to think that There's plenty of agencies out there that don't even have an agency management system that are still operating off of spreadsheets at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, mm. So what's next for you? I mean, I feel like your business seems like it's growing well. I mean, based on the amount of times you show up in my feed at this point, which is good. But I mean, are the things that you're doing digitally now, are you starting to see those things pay you back in dividends?
Yes, absolutely. Um,
Which is why you wish you did it 3 years ago.
oh yeah, yes, and maybe too, because anytime, first time you do a video on your phone, you suck, right? Or you don't know what you're doing, and you're just like,
Listen, I
don't
got
know.
videos on YouTube for 20 years ago, and if you're any good at all, you can find them, and they suck. They are absolutely horrendous. I love showing them sometimes when I get up and speak, just so people, because a lot of times I'll get up and talk about build your online brand. Here's how you create content by starting with a giant piece and chopping it up into a bunch of smaller pieces and reels and
Mhm.
shorts and all of that stuff. And I'll say, and if you think you're bad, what do you know about this guy? And it's like me with a wrinkled sheet behind me and a back. It's absolutely horrible. But you know what? I didn't stop.
Mhm.
I didn't quit. And that's the thing. I mean, I think for any of us, if this is the direction we want to go, you made a decision, you regret that you didn't do it 3 years ago, but I'm fairly certain you're not going to stop doing it, even if you don't
No.
see exactly what you want out of it immediately. And, look, it's not easy. It requires discipline, but if you work it into your schedule every single day and make it a priority just to invest in your own brand, it doesn't matter. It could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour. Whatever it is likely more than what people are doing right now. Commit to what you know you can commit to and execute on that. Once you prove you can do that, then you can add, but it doesn't need to be, you don't need to do everything all at one time. Pick a platform, pick a message that you want to get out, and then just hammer it home and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. Don't be scared. I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't know how to use this edit, or I don't know how to use that app, or I don't sound as good as you. I sound, like I'm dying or whatever it is. And it's don't let don't let that scare you away.
Yeah, I agree. So we've been going, good grief, we've been going for an hour. Um, we're gonna wrap up. You have an open invite to come back. Definitely would love to talk to
Yes.
you more. But I wanna leave you with this one thing. We're a week away, inside of a week away from Thanksgiving. So what's one thing you're thankful for that you've learned along the way in your journey? And number two, what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody else who's a new producer coming into the industry that has zero experience?
One thing that I'm thankful for is that we're able to start over again. So every day is a new day to start over again. You don't have to let the old you or your past be who defines you. So even if you made a mistake, you're married, single, divorced, whatever it is, you're not that person. And don't let whatever happened to you define you. You're a new person. That's
And,
what
and,
I'm
and
thankful for.
specifically, if we want to translate that into our industry, you get your teeth kicked in cold calling on Tuesday. Guess
Hmm.
what? Tuesday's not relevant to Wednesday. Now
No.
Wednesday's here and you start over again and you just get back up, dust yourself off and do it again. And I think I mean, that's very good advice. You can't let personally the choices you've made in the past, whether they be, if they were mistakes or whatever, define who you're going to be moving forward. If you don't make mistakes, you can't refine yourself into the best product you could possibly be. Number one. Number two, though, from a workflow standpoint, as a producer, every day you start over and you have to go into it with that mindset. You can't dwell on what happened. Like when we arm the alarm at the end of the day and I walk out the door, that's wrapping up that day. That day's not coming back to me. When I come in tomorrow morning, it's all new and I start over again with whatever today presents. So that's good.
Hmm.
That's good.
And then for new producers, it is ask yourself, what is your mission for today? Like, what is it that you want to accomplish? Because sometimes it's new. I speak out of experience. I didn't know. I was just kind of like, oh, I just want to get leads. This is this. But I was just thinking about myself. I was just thinking about, okay, I need to collect numbers. I need to do this. but I was not thinking about the person behind the phone. I wasn't thinking about who this person was, what they were doing, how I'm serving them. I was just like, blah, 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 like give me your number, give me your, give me your email. It's all about me, me, me. And when you make that mindset, you shift that mindset to like, who am I serving? That's going to be like the game changer there.
100%. And it's funny because we interviewed Larry Levine, who wrote the book Selling from the Heart and Selling in a Post-Trust World. And that's literally 100%. The two things that you just said sum up his entire theory. And that is number
Mm-hmm.
one, invest in yourself. You have to fall in love with yourself first before other people are going to like you. You have to be the best version of yourself. And number two, you need to be a servant. You need to be a servant leader.
Mm-hmm.
You're there. We're here to serve other people. We need to listen more than we speak. We need to have empathy and all of those things. And so I think your advice is 100% spot on. And seems to be along the lines of what I hear from a lot of other people. It just amazes me that we make it so hard to actually do those things, but we're human, right? It requires discipline and vulnerability and admitting that we're not perfect and taking a shot to the ego to be able to get better. But if that's what it takes, like I'm not too proud for anything. It's funny because people say, well, you probably are. I've said it to you 100 times. Well, you probably already know this. You probably already know that. I don't know everything. And I know you don't know everything either, right? And we never will. So we might as well approach every day with that being the mindset, because I can't think of a single day that I've lived, at least as an adult, where I haven't learned something new every single day. And it's crazy. Like worthless knowledge like trivia and Jeopardy answers. I learned those things, but I also learned how to replace the heating element in my dryer by watching a YouTube video. Like it's not just limited to insurance, right? We can learn all kinds of stuff and make ourselves better as a result. Well, listen, I know your day's just getting started out there because you're on the other coast. So I appreciate you taking time to chat with me. Really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to having you back again sometime soon. So have a great Thanksgiving and just keep killing it. I'm watching from afar and I enjoy watching your content and seeing the things you're doing to make waves out there for sure.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.